Right, time now for us to have a look at the stories making the headlines in media right across the world. And we're going to start with the Washington Post today, a story we've been covering in business. The US Department of Justice suing AT&T to try and block its $85 million bid for Time Warner. There are concerns the Trump administration's criticisms of CNN could be playing a part in that. Let's move on to the Financial Times now. The fallout from Germany's coalition talks collapsing on Monday. How the financial markets responded to the news out of Europe's biggest economy. That's reflected there in the FT. Next, for the Independent Online, it's the latest Brexit news out of the UK. Where would we be without the Brexit news? British Prime Minister Theresa May agreeing, says the Indy, to a £40 billion Brexit divorce bill to try to break the deadlock with the EU. The French publication Le Figaro also looks at Brexit from a slightly rosier hue for them. Paris announced as the new home to the European Banking Authority once the Brexit divorce is finalised. Online for the Business Insider, we've got a look at Bitcoin, the virtual currency which the publication says was laughable 2 years ago. Well, it's now hit an all-time high. And finally, let's have a look at Associated Press. It's got an online article about Pope Francis, who's calling on police to show mercy during traffic stops. So if drivers are doing things they shouldn't, the police should be merciful upon them. It is our Twitter discussion as well this morning. You can have your say on that, as you have been already, of course. Right then. Let's have a look at this lot. With me is Geraint Anderson, who's an author, former stockbroker and newspaper columnist, Cityboy by name. Geraint, let's start with an American city story of sorts. This is the Washington Post's take on the Justice Department deciding to step in over this proposed merger between AT&T and which is what, a telecoms basically business, and Time Warner, very much a media business.
Well, I mean, there was, ever since the late 90s, we've always had the TMT sector, technology, media, telecoms, and there was always this talk about integration of a vertical nature and that this would, you know, be the future. This has happened now, and what the strange thing about this is, it doesn't seem like there's any potential antitrust issues. They do different things. So therefore, the conspiracy theorists are out in full, and they are saying quite simply that Donald Trump hates CNN. He appointed the antitrust guy who's the Department of Justice guy who's looking into this, and therefore he is causing problems. And I'm afraid I probably have to agree with them, because something like this hasn't happened since the early 70s, a blockage of a vertical integration of this nature from the DOJ. So therefore, I'm afraid I'm with the conspiracy theorists in this, and usually I'm not. Donald Trump is behaving like a dictator.
Does it go so far that Time Warner's boss said this defies logic and is unprecedented? But there was a case a couple of years ago of Comcast taking over. It was NBC Universal. That was in 2012. Well, that's a similar vertical takeover, which actually Time Warner, maybe they're regretting it now, but they had a few critical remarks to make.
Funny that they would have said that that was a great idea to block that. Yeah, I just think that the specifics of this particular case don't add up. You know, you have a telecoms internet company on the one hand, you have a media company here, and, you know, unless you're Fox News, Donald Trump doesn't like you because you might be telling the truth. Donald Trump is increasingly acting like a rather sort of thin-skinned, petulant man who has, apparently, according to several people, a revenge list. People he wants to take revenge on, and I think CNN is most certainly the top of that.
Geraint, don't sit on the fence. Tell us what you think. I think we have a view as to where you're coming from there. Let's move on to the FT's view on the collapse of talks in Germany, these coalition talks. I mean, they've been rumbling on for weeks and weeks and weeks. I think beyond Germany, not many people thought that there was a crisis in the offing, but now we have a crisis. They're sort of fairly conservative in their reporting here, the FT. It's not massive crisis, it's a bit of a collapse of talks.
Yeah, I mean, it's the democratic process in play in Germany. The problem is, of course, Angela Merkel has been there for well over a decade now. She's been a solid entity in a confusing and unstable world. When you've got Trump and Brexit and North Korea and all the Middle East and all these other things, she has been there. So to lose her now would be adding yet another element of uncertainty. And the interesting thing is the markets have not responded particularly badly, which is odd. You know, I would have thought that both the euro would be down a bit more than it is, and that generally financial markets would be hit hard, and they are.
They had a bit of a dip and then sort of eased their way back up again, didn't
It suggests, you know, that the one thing that 12 years in the city did teach me is that, you know, uncertainty is the thing that markets hate. And if she now has to form another coalition with someone she didn't want to, or form a minority government, or the third option, which is probably the worst, in the short term at least, is having another election, then you'd think that the markets would dip, but it seems not. But the other interesting thing about this is, all those people who wanted a precise date for Brexit to happen, this is exactly the kind of unforeseen eventuality that makes a mockery of that decision, because there are these unforeseen circumstances that could delay the process. So
that's a very interesting
Brexiteers
point.
Take note.
Not least because Angela Merkel so often has been seen to be the one figure who can come in within European summits and council meetings and say, right, this is how we've got to do it, and other countries have to listen ultimately.
That's right.
So she's not there. That would certainly have an impact.
Yeah, we've got the EU summit, I think it's on the 14th, 15th of December. There's talk of really trying to make some progress there. And if she's in a state of flux, that could be out the window. And once again, this idea of the fixed time for a Brexit date is shown to be ridiculous.
Well, and that might be the case. But you bring us very neatly onto that summit that you're talking about, because we know Brexit will be right at the heart of the discussions there. And the online, India Online, suggesting that there's a £40 billion offer now ready to be slapped on the table, but not as a gimme. There has to be something in return, and that is the start of the trade negotiations. Yeah,
I think it was Boris Johnson who, when they started talking about numbers like this, said that the EU could go whistle for it. And we're once again being shown quite clearly that it's not us who really hold the cards here. We went in with about 20 billion, I believe, or 18, 20 billion. The EU said 60 billion, and funnily enough, we've offered 40 billion. So it's a bit like we're in a kind of, you know, sort of Middle Eastern souk trying to do a bit of bargaining with a seller. But it once again shows me that we're not the people in the driving seat here. We've got 27 countries who are there in a unified bloc. If anything, this is actually adding unity to them. Yeah,
but it is about playing your hand right, isn't it? And
Absolutely.
trying to reduce the time you're giving the EU as well to say, we'll take that away and consider it. Both sides know they've got to get on with it, and the EU has got quite a bit to lose.
Absolutely, but this concept that just because, you know, we buy lots of German cars, they're desperate for a deal, they also have something to lose if they make the process of leaving too easy for us. Because there may be other countries that want to do the same. So it's not just a question of taking revenge on us, it's a question of warning other countries that may feel about doing a Brexit similar process, that maybe the process isn't as easy as they like to think.
No. A very quick reflection on, I think Paris and Amsterdam are the beneficiaries of these EU agencies, which we used to have, or still have at the moment, and they're going with 1,000 jobs with them.
So European Banking Authority and the Medicine Agency, European Medicine Agency, both leaving London, 1,000 reasonably skilled jobs leaving us, one to Paris, one to Amsterdam. What it tells us, which is slightly sad, especially for Remainers like myself, is that it's becoming a hard reality now, Brexit. You know, we still hold out hope.
Water, isn't it?
Yeah, that really is. There's serious things occurring now, and those hopes that we have perhaps foolishly hold that maybe this process will end, it's beginning to look very, very unlikely.
Right, look, you know a bit about the city, obviously. Bitcoin.
Yes.
You got any?
I haven't. Funnily enough, a former girlfriend just called me up a couple of weeks ago and said, should I invest? And I told her not to do it. Like anything...
Well, Business Insider, it tells us Bitcoin at an all-time high.
Yet another bad decision. I'm sure she'll be ringing me up and telling me what an idiot I am. I mean, the thing about Bitcoin, as far as I can stand, is that it's particularly used by criminal entities because of the nature of the currency. So I'm wondering if we assume supply and demand are the principal motivators of its movement up and down. Does this tell me that there's more criminals out there using it more often? And in fact, that might not be a good sign, because Bitcoin, by its anonymity, by its digital nature, is the preferred currency of our drug dealers and so forth.
So put money in it, you spin the wheel, really, whether you win or lose.
Are you complicit in helping drug dealers? I'm not sure. Maybe not.
That's another point, but a fair point nonetheless to make. one last story, which is to reflect on Pope Francis, which we don't do
Yes.
that often at this point, is offering mercy to drivers who transgress on the roads. Basically, a message out to police in Italy, I think, to say, be gentle, be merciful on drivers. It's our question of the day as well.
Yeah.
What do you think of that
It's an odd one to choose. I mean, being merciful is obviously an extremely Christian concept, and it's a wonderful one, and it blesseth he who receiveth and he who giveth, as Shakespeare said in The Merchant of Venice. But this particular crime that he's referring to, maybe it's talking about using mobile phones, maybe it's talking about drink driving. You know, I don't know. I'm not being a parent of 2 young kids. I'm not too keen on the punishments that may be imposed on driving offences being that much weaker, because actually I don't want nut jobs on the road.
No nut jobs.
Hurting my children.
No mercy for nut jobs on the road. You're right, that is a great expression to close on. Should say you're not on your own. That is the vast majority of Twitter response we've had as well. They're not in the Pope's pocket on this one.
No.
Great to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much indeed.